So I first just wanted to thank Maggie Dominic for her incredible knowledge and extensive archives that she donated to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, as well as New York University. Maggie worked at the Caffe Cino and other Off-Off-Broadway venues and is pictured on the left with Joe Chino. Playwright Robert Patrick's Caffe Cino website was also provided many great photos. When our project sought to nominate the Caffe Cino to the National Register of Historic Places 3 years ago, I report about the Chino's history. I had to prove its significance as well. The Chino is one of my favorite sites that I've ever researched, a wonderfully quirky, vibrant, and touching story that comes right out of the history books of what Greenwich Village was like during the 1960s. In 2017, my extensive report was submitted, and then after reviews at the state and federal levels, was listed on the New York State and National Registers of Historic Places. We were thrilled that these efforts then resulted in the Caffe Cino being designated a New York City landmark last June, along with 5 other LGBT sites that we proposed to the Landmarks Preservation Commission. So first, I want to give you a snapshot of the Caffe Cino's history, followed by its importance as the birthplace of Off-Off-Broadway, and finally as a pioneer in the development of gay theater at a time when depicting homosexuality on stage was illegal. This slide shows the Caffe Cino in 1965 next to our photo from 2017, which pretty much looks the same except for the restaurant, which has since been replaced by another eating establishment. This map shows various LGBT sites in Greenwich Village that we've pinned so far on our website, and I've added images here of the Stonewall Inn and Washington Square Park to help show you where the Chino was located, which is the image on the lower left corner. And the blue pins just south of Washington Square Park along Dugal Street is another important location that you'll be seeing tonight. The Caffe Cino was a groundbreaking cafe theater operated by Joe Chino, an openly gay Buffalo, New York native of Sicilian heritage. When he was just 16, increased tensions with his brothers because of his sexuality led him to run away to New York City, where he pursued a career as a ballet dancer. His dreams of opening a coffee house began in 1954, and in December of 1958, his then boyfriend, painter Ed Franzen, saw a for rent sign on the storefront space at 31 Cornelia Street, which was located in the Italian section of Greenwich Village. In his only known interview, held in 1965, Chino described how Franzen helped him find the space. When I got there, Ed was in conversation with Josie, the landlady, who was hanging out the upstairs window with blonde sausage curls. He said, "This is Mrs. Lima." I said, "Oh, you're Italian." She says, "Yes, what are you?" I said, "Sicilian." So she said, "I don't even have to come down. I'll throw the keys." She threw the keys and we went in and viewed the ruins. The first thing you saw when you looked down the room was the toilet at the back. I thought, there's a toilet and there's a sink and there's a fireplace. This will be a counter, a coffee machine here, a little private area. Chino originally intended for his coffee house to feature art exhibitions, but by February of 1960, shows were staged, beginning with works by Truman Capote and Oscar Wilde, and then notably Tennessee Williams. This 1961 photo featuring Shirley Stoller as the Gypsy shows how the previously vacant storefront space was transformed into a modest venue for intimate experimental theater, with the performance happening on a small makeshift stage and the audience watching from coffee tables. The cafe's first original play was James Howard's Fly Spray, which premiered in the summer of 1960. A year later, Doric Wilson became the Chino's first resident playwright by writing 4 plays that helped establish the cafe as a venue for new work and as a major force in the newly emerging Off-Off-Broadway movement. The innovative lighting work by Johnny Dodd also became a key component of the cafe's productions. By 1962, the Chino came into its own, putting on a new show almost every week and keeping to a regular schedule of 2 performances per night, with a 3rd show at 1:00 a.m. taking place on Fridays and Saturdays. Chino, who's seen here at the coffee counter with director Marshall Mason, was the one to schedule performances using the peculiar method of selecting a play based on the playwright's astrological sign. He seldom, if ever, read the scripts. Maggie mentioned to me that this coffee counter, where Cino could typically be found next to his famed espresso machine, was really where Off-Off-Broadway theater was born. And a fun fact, an unknown Bette Midler stopped by the cafe to give Jo Cino her resume, which he stapled to the wall behind the coffee counter, along with other ephemera. However, Midler never actually performed here, but it's still a great story, and he saw something in her. Cino introduced nightly plays and would famously say, "It's magic time," before leaving the stage area. Most plays lasted about 30 minutes as a rule, as he felt that the chairs were too uncomfortable for people to sit for any longer period of time. The cafe opened for evening performances and remained closed during the day, while Jo Cino worked various jobs elsewhere in order to support the venue. Productions were made on very low budgets. Cino provided the room free of charge to playwrights, who would then bring in any costumes, props, sets that they needed. Patrons also didn't pay for entry, even during the most popular shows when lines would form outside the cafe. Instead, they only had to spend a minimum of $1 from the cafe menu. At the end of performances, a bucket would be passed around to audience members, and the money would be split amongst the performers. Because productions typically only lasted a week, the decor of the cafe changed as quickly. The pioneering Cuban-born American playwright Irene Fornes, one of the few lesbian theater artists documented at the Cino, later recalled that every day was like throwing a party. In this photo, she's sitting next to Al Carmine, by the way, who founded Judson Poets Theater, another influential off-Broadway theater. He's on the right. And that's also where Fornes had a lot of her work staged. I'm sorry, he's on the left. In 1964, The Madness of Lady Bright, centered on an aging drag queen character and written by the Cino's most prolific playwright, Lanford Wilson, premiered to huge critical acclaim and became the Cino's breakthrough hit. And actually, Robert Patrick let us know today that it premiered on May 18th, 1964, so 56 years ago tonight. It was also a Monday. The cafe's reputation was so strong and so respected that following a 1965 fire, downtown theater artists host several benefits at local theaters to raise funds for its reconstruction, including one with established playwright Edward Albee, pictured with Cino on the upper right, who was an avid supporter of the cafe. While the interior of the Cino was being rebuilt, it performed plays at Ellen Stewart's La Mama in the East Village. La Mama, founded in 1961, is still located in the East Village and is the longest running and most prolific off-Broadway venue. On May 18th, 1965, again May 18th, 55 years ago tonight, the Cino resumed operations on Cornelia Street with a performance of With Creatures Make My Way by H.M. Katukas, which is the play advertised in the photo at left. You can see that the artwork in both of these photos almost completely cover the front of the cafe, which was intentional, particularly with the increased attention of the cops and curious onlookers, as the cafe became known as a gay hangout. The abstract posters were designed so that those in the know could figure out what plays were happening inside. On May 17th, 1966, 54 years ago yesterday, the cafe staged its biggest hit, DamesAtHome, a parody of 1930s Busby Berkeley-style movie musicals that starred teenager Bernadette Peters in her first major role as Ruby, a chorus girl from the Midwest, who makes it big on Broadway. Performing to packed houses over a 3-month period, the musical had the longest run of any Cino production. For such a success, however, Dames also marked the beginning of the Cino's decline. When the show moved to Off-Broadway, Jo Cino and Dames director Robert Dada never properly received credit for its creation, which was a tough blow emotionally. Cino suffered other personal and professional hardships in the post-Dames era, the last year of his life, and was said to be depressed about gaining weight and getting older, and losing control of his coffee house as it became more famous and therefore less like the intimate space he had originally envisioned for himself and his friends. A few months after the accidental death of Cino's boyfriend, John Torrey, pictured on the left, Cino took his own life and died on April 2nd, 1967. Working off a schedule of plays that Cino had put in place for the next several months, the cafe stayed open until added police harassment and mounting fines became too costly, which I'll go into more in a bit, and the cafe closed for good on March 17th, 1968. The Cino's legacy, however, lives on over 50 years later as the birthplace of Off-Off-Broadway and gay theater. Ellen Stewart recalled in 1985, "It was Joseph Cino who started Off-Off-Broadway. I would like to ask everybody to remember that." Beginning in the late 19th century, and certainly following World War II, Greenwich Village was famous as a haven for bohemians and artists like Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, who rejected the establishment. So it's not surprising that the neighborhood served as the cradle of the off-off-Broadway movement, which itself rejected the growing commercialism of Broadway and even off-Broadway. In the late 1950s, painters, poets, musicians, and eventually playwrights began honing their skills in the uncompetitive, experimental settings of coffee houses that had long flourished in the Italian section of Greenwich Village, largely along MacDougal Street and south of Washington Square Park. Off-Off-Broadway was particularly important for young and emerging playwrights in the 1960s because they could write experimental work about subjects of their choosing without the pressure of needing plays to be financially successful. Importantly, it emphasized the staging of new works by American playwrights rather than existing work by mostly European playwrights. Off-Off-Broadway venues were intimate and located in unconventional spaces in downtown Manhattan, such as coffee houses like the Caffe Cino, churches like Judson Memorial Church, which was home to Judson Poets Theater, or small storefronts like the one used by La Mama before moving to this building at Center in 1969. Even that building, repurposed for theater use, is very different from buildings that were specifically built to be theaters, like the Richard Rodgers Theater in the Broadway Theater District. I like this comparison between the Caffe Cino, where the audience is practically part of the production, and the much larger Richard Rodgers Theater, because it's pretty easy to see the differences between off-off-Broadway and Broadway experiences, and the stark contrast in the size of each house. That intimate experience at the cafe was perfectly in line with Joe Cino's vision for cafe theater, a term he preferred over off-off-Broadway. He recalled in 1965, "I firmly believe that there is a definite place for cafe theater, where hot coffee or hot anything may be spilled on an actor if he doesn't pay attention to the audience. It's very exciting to be working so close to people." Although plays were being staged in various village coffee houses beginning in the late 1950s, the Caffe Cino is credited as the first off-off-Broadway venue of importance to emerge in the early 1960s. It is especially significant in the history of the genre because it remained in operation long enough to nurture and support the art form, thus allowing off-off-Broadway to become established. The Cino was also singularly devoted to the production of theater, and it also gave a significant number of emerging playwrights, actors, directors, and others the opportunity to improve their technique and enhance their reputations, as well as providing audiences and critics with a chance to experience the new art form regularly. The practice of staging plays in most other coffee houses was short-lived for two primary reasons. First, some of the earliest cafes on MacDougal Street only put on plays in order to capitalize on an increase in village tourism, which peaked in the summer of 1960. These cafe owners weren't interested in experimental theater as an art form and put no effort into its development once the tourism craze declined. In contrast, a 1962 article in the Village Voice noted that the Cino remains a serious theater and coffee enterprise without the usual touristy gimmicks. Secondly, and simultaneously, many cafes were heavily fined and or temporarily shut down for staging plays without cabaret licenses and for other infringements, however minor. Fines only intensified for village coffee houses, including the Caffe Cino, over the decade. By 1964, the operator of the Gaslight Cafe on MacDougal Street estimated that he had made 74 court appearances in 4 years. These fines were in large part due to the attention that coffee houses received from neighborhood residents, who would often complain about the noise, but who also took issue with many of the people who frequented them. And this was most often gay men and lesbians, people of color, bohemians, and interracial couples. The Caffe Cino managed to stay open because Joe Cino figured out early on that payoffs, which were constant, were the best way to deal with city officials out of court. Another important factor was that while other cafes had to close when they could not pay employee wages due to mounting fines, or they stopped staging plays to avoid them, Joe Cino had a close inner circle of friends who volunteered to work without pay. Cino himself worked other jobs during the day and late night hours to keep the cafe going. Even though the Cino was only open for 10 years, its significance can be measured by the substantial influence that it had in shaping the Off-Off-Broadway movement in its infancy, and on the careers of the important artists associated with it, including those who received numerous accolades, such as Pulitzer Prizes, Tony Awards, and Obie Awards during and after the Cino years. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual people, or who we were able to confirm as such anyway, it's always a little tricky when doing LGBT research of the past, they are noted in purple. Gay men in particular were incredibly influential in the emergence of Off-Off-Broadway as an art form, and it became apparent to me that you can't talk about the early years of Off-Off-Broadway without also acknowledging the simultaneous emergence of another cultural art form that grew out of Caffe Cino, and that's gay theater. But first, some context. Generally, when looking at 20th century mainstream American theater, stage performances dealing with gay themes typically came in the form of supporting characters that played up early 20th century gay stereotypes, largely meant for the amusement of heterosexual audiences. Sympathetic works were often the subject of police harassment. In 1927, the New York legislature passed the Wales Padlock Law, which, among other things, made the depiction of LGBT people illegal. In 1945, the Belasco Theater's lesbian drama Trio was the last Broadway show impacted by the law, but it certainly continued to have a detrimental effect on the Broadway stage and remained on the books until 1967, which just shows how incredible the existence of gay theater at Joe Cino's Cafe was at this time. The first documented space where LGBT people could consistently gather and see theater by and about them was the Cherry Grove Community House and Theater on Fire Island, a gay haven off the South Shore of Long Island. Campy, gay-themed works began appearing there in the late 1940s, but mostly benefited established theater professionals who could afford to live on Fire Island throughout the summer, the only time when plays were performed there. Caffe Cino was technically then the second gay theater venue after Cherry Grove, but in many ways it was the first true gay theater venue that was accessible to all, since it was open year-round in a centrally located cafe in Greenwich Village, which was then the epicenter of gay life in New York City, and plays were also extremely affordable, regardless of one's economic or social status. The Caffe Cino also offered emerging gay playwrights the opportunity to hone their craft and be critically reviewed. The Cino is considered the first venue to regularly feature work by and about gay men. In 1961, Doric Wilson's Now She Dances became the first Off-Off-Broadway play to portray gay people in a positive light, as well as an early play to deal with gay identity. That same year, Wilson's And He Made a Her premiered at the Cino and examined the drag scene at that time. The Cino's breakthrough hit, and an early play to feature an explicitly gay character, was Lanford Wilson's The Madness of Lady Bright, which premiered in May of 1964. Centered around an aging drag queen slowly going mad alone in his room, the play was so popular that by 1965, the Cino became particularly well known for presenting gay or gay-friendly works. According to author Wendell C. Stone, the Cino presented performances by and about gay men to a degree never before experienced. Widespread homophobia in post-World War II America was the result of many factors. It certainly didn't help that homosexuality was still classified as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association, something that remained in place until 1973. It also didn't help that when people went to the movies or to the theater, they really only saw negative and stereotypical portrayals of gay men and lesbians. And for many people, gay and straight, this was really the only kind of exposure they had to LGBT people. Homophobia also kept many people in the closet for fear of being disowned by their families, losing their jobs, going to jail, or being a target of physical or mental abuse. This is what made the Caffe Cino so extraordinary for its time. While it was always a space that was enjoyed by gay and straight people, it was an important social hub for the gay community at a time when bars were pretty much the only other option. And as a result of the freedom of expression that gay playwrights enjoyed there, and as a testament to the arts in general as a powerful platform for change, audiences were also given rare public exposure to multidimensional and realistic gay characters for the first time. Robert Patrick recalled that during a showing of his first play, The Haunted Host, on the left, he heard a young man in the audience tell his parents that he was gay just like the character on stage. Another gay-themed play, Robert Heidi's The Bed, was so successful that it led to about 150 performances at the Cino and a film version by Andy Warhol, a Caffe regular. Playwright William M. Hoffman later recalled, "I never would have been a playwright without the Caffe Cino. I never certainly would have written about gay subjects that freely. That was the kind of empowerment that the place gave us. We were no longer victims." The Cino was clearly an affirming and validating place for gay people, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that its influence was felt far beyond its walls and long after it had closed, serving as an important precursor to the more militant activism that would erupt in a few short years at Stonewall and the ensuing gay liberation movement of the 1970s. Case in point is the story of Perry Bress, who would go on to co-found the Gay Men's Health Project in the early 1970s, not to be confused with the perhaps more well-known gay men's health crisis. Bress was 19 when he first started seeing shows at the Cino, found a gay affirming community there, and vividly recalled identifying with the young, small-town gay character in Jeff Weiss's A Funny Walk Home. While gay theater at this time was dominated by gay white men, and even in general, female directors were rare in the theater world, Roberta Sklar was a pioneering female and lesbian director who began directing plays at the Cino in 1963. However, author Sarah Warner notes that the Cino was not a place for lesbians with a radical feminist agenda. In New York City, at least, this kind of theater came a bit later, notably at the Wild Caffe Theater in the East Village, which, since the 1980s, is considered one of the premier centers for lesbian, women's, and transgender theater in New York. After the closing of the Caffe Cino, the gay theater that it had nurtured continued to evolve. 2.5 weeks after the Cino's very last performance in March of 1968, Mark Crowley's controversial play, The Boys in the Band, premiered Off-Broadway. Numerous gay theater companies formed around the world, including The Other Side of Silence, better known as Tossus, in 1974, and co-founded by Doric Wilson as New York City's first professional gay theater company, and The Glines, which produced Harvey Fierstein's Torch Song trilogy. The gay and lesbian theatrical legacy states that perhaps Joe Cino's most honorable accomplishment is that, as an openly and unapologetically gay man in an incredibly repressive age and society, he put himself and his establishment on the line to foster the first honest, literate, and compassionate portrayals of homosexuality to appear on the New York stage. And I just want to close with these two plaques. The one on the left was donated by Robert Patrick in 2008 and was installed at 31 Cornelia Street with other Cino alums in attendance. It mysteriously went missing 3 years ago, but then it was found. That's a whole other story. But it's found, it's back. And then on the right is our project's plaque, which we'll be installing on the building once it's safe to do so. We wanted the plaque to acknowledge that the building was listed on the National Register and also that gay theater flourished here. So that concludes this part of the program. We're going to open it up to questions. And then if Cino alums who are here would like to make some brief comments after the Q&A, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks, everyone.
Amanda, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'll give you the first question that's come through the chat, and just reminding everyone to please use the chat panel to ask any questions you have for Amanda or any other members of the project team or any Cino alums that have joined us tonight. The first question from a familiar name, Chris Brzee, is asking, these archival images are amazing. Are they from a particular archive or are they publicly available? And are some of these archival images available on the project website?
Yes, they're actually from all over the place. A large number of them are from Robert Patrick's Caffe Cino website. And many of them are from Maggie Dominic, who they're in her personal collection, or she donated them to the New York University Archive or the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. So both of those, when it's safe to do so, are available by appointment. And also on our Caffe Cino entry on our website, you will see a number of these photos with proper credit, and you'll see where they're from. But there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of amazing photos of this cafe in the 10 years it was open. And Chris Brzee also did the contemporary photos for our website. So thanks, Chris.
Again, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat panel. But maybe while people have an opportunity to think about what questions they have, Amanda, is there anyone else joining us tonight who you'd like to introduce individually?
Well, I believe that Robert Heidi is here, and Maggie Dominic. So obviously both big players at the Caffe Cino, and hopefully they'll be able to reminisce a bit. I don't know if anyone here anyone else is from the Cino?
This is Maggie. Can you hear me?
Hey Maggie, how are you?
I'm good. I'm operating with an obsolete computer, so I apologize. The presentation was fantastic, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your help. Yeah.
I think my audio may be a little questionable. Can you hear me well?
You can hear you. Yeah, there's a little bit of something or other.
An
We can
echo.
hear you. Yeah.
I just want to say that it's fabulous. It really is. I just want to say thank you again.
And also, Robert, I've unmuted you if there's anything you'd like to share with us.
Well, thank you all. I didn't know what to expect. And Ms. Davis, Mr. Loospotter, and I don't know who else is responsible. You've such a clear, sharp telling of the complicated story. I felt that anyone who knew nothing about it would come away with a very clear picture of what happened. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Robert.
If anyone wants to know a lot of more complicated things about it, there are my sites and Ms. Dominic's site online.
Yes, incredibly invaluable resources, I will say. And I
thought it was wonderful. I thought it was wonderful you're putting the gay people in purple.
Yes, had to pick the right color.
Yeah.
And also if anyone's interested, looking at it from a historic preservation standpoint and our National Register nomination, if you go to our website and the Caffe Cino entry, the link to that nomination is there at the bottom of the page, or you can contact me and I can send it to you.
Amanda, I have another question that's just come through. And if you feel there's anyone else that should respond to this as well, let us know. Mm-hmm. Is there a theater or performance venue in New York City today that would be comparable to Caffe Cino in the way in which Cino provided a space and community for LGBT directors, playwrights, and actors to be experimental without the pressures of the bottom line?
That might be a great question for Jay, because I feel like he'd like to pipe. I mean, Jay, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It might be a better question for Mr. Patrick. But,
well, that's true. That's true.
I mean, obviously, New York still has lots and lots and lots of tiny theaters.
Yeah.
You know, it has the Fringe Fest when the years that goes. There are lots of off-Broadway theaters, off-Broadway theaters, you know, Cherry Lane and La Mama for sure, which is still going very strong in a similar way that Cino did in its heyday, doing lots of plays for brief periods of time, giving lots of people their first start without any sort of commercial, you know, considerations for the most part, and that kind of thing.
It's just also interesting, I think, with the Caffe Cino, it's so unique. First of all, any of us who didn't live through the 1960s, I mean, the rent alone, even if that rent does not exist in New York City today, it's astronomical. And the fact that he was providing this all essentially for free, that's just an amazing combination of factors as well. It seems so unique in its time.
Well, it's so, the Cino's importance in gay theater, of course, cannot be overstated. but I don't know if that doesn't sometimes overshadow the fact that it brought theater in general into another era by doing plays for the first time consistently outside of the commercial, clerical, legal, so-called professional theater world. It enabled us as playwrights and other theater artists to think as the Impressionist painters had thought 100 years ago. I'm not doing it to sell. I'm not doing it to get reviews. I'm not doing it to get famous. Doing the work for itself. No one had, until Joe Cino got the idea of doing the plays for free, it had not been possible to have a capital M modern theater. And
right.
that is present in America today, very rarely, very sparsely. Here in LA, there are a number of cabaret artists, or as they call themselves, performance artists, who do much the same thing on bars, coffee houses, any random space they can get. But it's not regular. It's not omnipresent. It has trouble building up an audience, no hope of getting press recognition, and of course, no hope whatsoever of making back anything that's spent on it. Very quickly, on the corner of my block, a woman has given her yard, her front yard, as a theater. Once a month, she does a performance arts cabaret. And that's as near as I know to the feeling of the Caffe Cino. She doesn't in any way limit or restrict what people can do. It's acquired an audience. You know, there are people, it grows. I'm saying too much, but I wanted to say that about it. It was an important theater movement apart from the subject matter of gay plays.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question, Amanda, is just very practical. How many people, especially, maybe you can zoom back to that image showing the interior of the cafe?
Oh, well, 40 or 50 was a crowd.
Yeah. Wow, it's a while back, isn't it?
Well,
That's exactly the question, is about how many people could fit into the Cino for any singular play.
Yeah, as Robert said, about 40 or 50, and Maggie would say you knew it was a full house if someone was sitting on the cigarette machine.
right. The biggest audiences we ever had were for Jeff Weiss's play,
Wow.
Tony Walk Home. And we had people sitting in the photo you have online right now. If I could move that Zoom group chat thing. The scenery loft that you see curtained over the front doors.
Yeah.
We had people sitting in the scenery loft.
Oh, wow.
And I can't believe we ever got more than 70. The night Joe Cino died, people came streaming into the cafe, which probably was the biggest crowd we ever had. And we had to stop the play because the audience was literally over streaming the stage. But 40, 50 was a good house.
It's incredible to think how many people, I mean, when you look at this photo, the room actually looks a lot bigger than it actually is.
Yes.
Because of this perspective. If you go to this, when we were doing the research for the National Register nomination, the restaurant Poe that was there had just left, so we were actually able to walk through it vacant. But even then, so you could really get a sense of just how small this place was, and being able to crowd that many people is incredible. Yeah.
Mr. Sherman, who took this photo of Shirley Staller in Camino Real, that you have on screen right now, used a lens that created that effect of a greater distance so he could show the whole aspect of the theater.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it looks larger. Also,
Yeah.
that beautiful Tiffany lamp looks like it's a great huge set piece, doesn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's.
I wish it was still there.
Yeah, it's just a tiny little lamp right near him. So you see this is an illusion.
So I do want to open it up. We have we're very fortunate to be joined by another Cino alum. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone except Amanda again. so that I can then, Amanda, we're joined by Bob Shields, who was an actor who performed at the Cino, and he'd like to speak just for a moment to share with us a little bit about the importance of the place and the feel of having been there. So just one moment.
Sure, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, this is Bob. Am I on?
Yes,
You're
hi,
on,
Bob.
Bob.
Hi, hey Bob, hey Maggie. If Bob Heidi is there, I didn't see him, but hi Bob Heidi. First of all, I'm not the first to say this, but one of the things I want to point out, when you walked into this place, it was like walking into a Christmas tree. And once you were inside there, you were in a different world. It was just an amazing space. I came in actually after Joe Cino had died. Charles Stanley, and I can't understate the brilliance of Charles Stanley. What he did in that place was just astonishing. So having missed out on Joe, he's a presence to me, but Charles Stanley was a solid one. And I always kind of got the feeling that he didn't even really like me. But years later, I ran into him and we had a really lovely conversation on the street not long before he died. In talking about this, because it is so, the influence of the Cino on gay theater in America and on gay life in America is so profound that it always concerns me as a straight actor who was working there, that we run the risk of getting this perceived as being a sort of a niche, a gay niche in amongst everything else. This was much bigger than that. What was so great about it was there were gay, straight, everybody was there and everybody was welcome. When we were doing, actually, what I started doing with Bob, and this was like the most fun I ever had acting in my life, was when we did the comic book productions. God bless him, Harry Katukas came in, got to play both Diana Prince and Wonder Woman, and he was better than anybody who's done it since. I came in on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the Cino would book a play and run it for 2 weeks. And on occasion, apparently in the first occasion, a show canceled the day it was supposed to go on. Katukas got the idea, let's go out and get these Wonder Woman comic books and bring it back, and we'll do it. We'll do Wonder Woman on stage. And they were just huge successes. I mean, this was like at the peak of the camp era. So these shows were nothing if not campy. And it was so great to do it and to be working with these incredibly talented people. And someone else I can never underestimate is Maggie Dominic. Maggie was the inspiration on stage for every one of us at that point in that theater. And I have never had that. I was so terrified of her because she was another one. I didn't think she liked me either, but now I don't think anybody ever liked me. I finally come to like myself, and it's I'm not a bad guy, but who knew?
I've unmuted Maggie in case she wants to respond to the idea that she was a terrifying presence at the theater.
Well, you know what's,
Go, Maggie.
this is my very first Zoom. And it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre that this is the one. Bob Shields was one of the main dwarfs in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So I always remember him, this very precious memory. And he helped me understand this Zoom program. I like him. I don't know why he thinks that. We all love him.
I'm glad this Zoom virtual experience was able to clarify.
I see Bob Patrick's hand raised.
Yeah.
I just love all of you guys. I just want to say that.
You too, Maggie. I miss you.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna mute everyone except Amanda, only because we have more folks who would love just a moment to speak. And at the end, we're happy when the kind of formal Q&A wraps to leave people to still speak and share and exchange reminiscences. But we're also joined tonight by Albert Poland, who would like to just say a word or two. One moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Albert.
Oh, great. I'm loving this so much, and I'm loving hearing Robert's voice. I had the good fortune in my career to work off-Broadway, and on Broadway. And And my experience off-Broadway was theater in its very purest form. We were all there to do theater for its own sake. And it was so happy and so wonderful. And it was such a community. And I loved it. And I spoke to a couple of universities about teaching courses, and I was a general manager by profession. And I really did not want to teach a course about being a general manager because I think it's involved into a wretched profession. But I thought if I did teach a course, I would love to teach one about the golden age of Off-Off-Broadway. And my fantasy was to have Robert as my first guest speaker. And I'm just loving this and very grateful to be participating in it. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for being here.
And then Amanda, I have a question, and maybe this isn't just for you, Amanda, maybe this is also for Bob and Robert and Maggie. Is there anyone who is here in the Zoom tonight who either was in or participated in or saw the original production of Dames at Sea that we're all here to celebrate?
Well, that definitely wasn't me. Wasn't around, but Robert Patrick's raising his hand. So I don't know. Can you unmute him or want me to?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, Robert, you're back up.
Oh, well, I was just saying, I was there real quickly in response to Bob Shields. It was Donald Brooks who actually had the idea of doing the comic book. Harry Katukas played Wonder Woman, but the idea was Donald Brooks's.
So what was it like to see Dames at Sea at the Cino?
At Dames at Sea?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it was wonderful watching Maggie Dominic practically design the show.
Right, and the stars.
She came in as I can't see Maggie, but she came in as a temple slave like me. The two of us would often be the only people there sweeping the floor or, cleaning up. We did anything. And one of the things she was given to do was to cut tin foil into stars and moons and things to hang around. So it practically became a Maggie Dominic design production, while the director, Bob Dada, virtually rewrote the script. Dames at Sea had been rejected by every theater on earth for 10 years. The copy that Bob Dada brought in was actually yellow with age. And it had never been done, but he saw a way of doing it, turning it into a cabaret show in which lights and sound and props would change the sets. So it didn't need millions of dollars worth of sets. He rewrote the script, and the opening song, Dames at Sea, was not in the show opening night. Bob saw the show, felt it needed a song there, went off in a corner, and Bob Dada wrote Dames at Sea, and the next night it was in. And this may be a very off-Broadway thing. When the show moved, Bob Dada's name was not in the program. Maggie Dominic's name was not in the program. The Caffe Cino was not mentioned in the program because the author and musicians felt the Cino was too much associated with drugs and homosexuality, and they didn't want it connected with them.
Oh. In the theater world, it's crazy.
I think maybe the last or second to last question. I'll leave the open for one more question so we can end on a high note, because this next question is on the somber side. You spoke about Joe Cino passing, Amanda, and I think Robert also mentioned being there the night of Joe's passing, or possibly Joe's funeral. But for those who don't know, can you just tell us a little bit about Joe Cino and what happened to him?
Yeah, well, he was found by Michael Smith, I believe, on the floor of the cafe. He had slit his wrists, and so he was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, which is no longer in the village, but I mean, the building's there, but the hospital isn't. And many members of the Off-Off-Broadway community were by his side over the next few days, and then he eventually passed away on April 2nd. And then there was a memorial service for him at Judson that was heavily attended. And that's kind of basic idea of what happened in those final days. But that's what, and Maggie had said that no one at the cafe knew what to do other than just to keep it going. So that's why they kept scheduling plays and performing, many of them that had been approved by Joe before he had passed away. And that continued for a little under a year, and probably would have kept going had not the problem of those mounting fines that were really plaguing many coffee houses, and that Joe had a particular talent for keeping under wraps. I mean, once he went, it just started to go out of control, and they could not afford to keep the coffee house open any longer, which is a shame, but yeah.
All right, just want to remind everyone that there are still a number of events that the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project will be hosting through the end of May and certainly into June. And of course, be on the lookout for that shirt, Andrew Dolkart. I'm going to spotlight you because I think people need to see this shirt one more time. Let me just find you. Bear with me. But you can see Andrew and Ken here are wearing shirts. There we go. That we are going to be making available. There you go. Andrew is spotlit. The shirts are here. Go to nyclgbtsites.org. In the coming days, weeks, we'll be announcing when those are available for purchase. And thank you everyone so much for joining us.